All right, let's talk about personality. Today we're going to build a pyramid, but not with stones. We're going to build it with the very blocks of our own behavior. We're diving into Hans Eysenck's really fascinating model, which says that who we are is deeply, deeply rooted in our biology. So, let's get started.
I mean, have you ever really thought about that? Why are some of us social butterflies and others are happy being wallflowers? Eysenck had a theory. He believed these big differences aren't just random quirks. They're actually part of a biological blueprint that shapes pretty much everything we do.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll nail down what Eysenck even meant by personality. Then, we'll build his famous pyramid of behavior, step by step. After that, we'll meet his 3 big personality types, look at the brain science behind them, and finally, see how this whole theory actually gets used out in the real world.
So, let's start at square one. What exactly did Eysenck think personality was? Because for him, it wasn't just some messy collection of habits and preferences. It was much more structured.
Here's his official definition, and the 2 words you really want to pay attention to are stable organization. Eysenck saw personality as this consistent, pretty predictable system. It's the whole package, your character, your emotions, your smarts, even your body, all of it working together to figure out how you, specifically, deal with the world.
And this is the real kicker. Eysenck wasn't saying your childhood or experiences don't matter. They do, but he was totally convinced that biology is in the driver's seat. He argued that our genetics, what we inherit from our parents, basically lays the foundation for the person we're going to become.
Okay, now we get to the core of this whole thing, the pyramid structure. Eysenck's big idea was that personality is built from the ground up. It starts with the tiniest, simplest things we do and organizes them all the way up into these huge, defining personality types.
So think of it like a 4-story building, right? On the ground floor, you've got these little one-off actions. Then those actions start to group together into habits. A bunch of habits cluster together to form a trait. And finally, at the very top, all those traits combine to create your overall personality type. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. So level 1 is the foundation, the specific response. This is just a single action. It's something you do once in a very specific situation. By itself, it doesn't really mean much. It's just a blip on the radar.
Okay, but what if that person doesn't just shout once? What if they regularly get into arguments, say every time they're in a debate? Well, that specific response is just leveled up. It's become a habitual response. It's a pattern. It's something they do again and again in the same kind of situation.
Moving on up to level 3, we get to traits. Now, a trait isn't just one habit, it's a whole collection of related habits. So maybe that habit of arguing hangs out with a habit of being impatient with people and a habit of interrupting. You put all those together and you get the broader personality trait that we'd probably call aggressive.
And here we are at the top of the pyramid, the type, or what Eysenck called a superfactor. This is the big picture. Here, a bunch of different but related traits all come together. So the trait of aggressiveness, along with traits like being a bit cold or egocentric, all get bundled up into one of Eysenck's 3 main personality types, in this case, psychoticism. It's a really neat way to see how one tiny action can actually reflect a huge biologically wired part of who you are.
So what are these big superfactors at the top? Eysenck believed you could boil down all of human personality into 3 massive universal dimensions. He called it the P-E-N model.
Here they are. First, you've got extraversion, which is all about being sociable and seeking out excitement. Then there's neuroticism, which is basically our tendency to be anxious or emotionally up and down. And last is psychoticism, and this is super important. This doesn't mean being psychotic. It's more of a scale for traits like being aggressive, tough-minded, or lacking empathy. Eysenck's idea was that every single one of us falls somewhere on the spectrum of all 3 of these.
Now, like I said, Eysenck wasn't just making the stuff up. He proposed that there were specific systems in our bodies and brains that were responsible for these differences. So let's pop the hood and take a look at the engine room of our personality.
So why are some of us introverts and some extroverts? Eysenck pointed to a part of the brainstem responsible for arousal. He said introverts naturally have a higher level of baseline brain activity. Their brains are already turned up, so to speak, so they try to avoid loud parties and chaos. Extroverts are the opposite. Their brains have a lower baseline arousal, which can feel boring, so they go out looking for excitement and people to basically wake their brains up.
And what about neuroticism? Well, that's all about the limbic system, your brain's emotional center. According to Eysenck, people who score high on neuroticism have a really reactive, kind of jumpy limbic system. They overreact to stress. On the flip side, people who are more emotionally stable just have a calmer, less reactive system. It lets them keep their cool when the pressure's on.
And for that third superfactor, psychoticism, Eysenck looked at our body's chemistry. He suggested that it was linked to things like higher levels of testosterone and lower levels of serotonin, which is a chemical that helps regulate mood. And that combo could lead to some of the traits we see at the high end of this scale, like poor impulse control or aggression.
Okay, this is all really interesting as a theory, but what's the point? I mean, how is Eysenck's model actually used out in the real world to help people?
Well, it's actually had a pretty big impact. In therapy, for example, it helps create behavior therapies designed to help anxious people. In the working world, it's used for career counseling, to help match an introvert with a quiet, detail-oriented job they'd probably thrive in. And in medicine, it helps us understand why someone high in neuroticism might be more likely to get sick from stress.
Of course, no theory is perfect, and Eysenck's model has its pros and cons. The big strengths are that it's scientific, you can measure it, and it does a great job of linking our psychology to our biology. But the critics say that boiling all of human personality down to just 3 dimensions is way too simple. They also argue it doesn't pay enough attention to our environment, and that the biological proof for some parts, especially psychoticism, is a little shaky.
And that kind of leaves us with this one last huge question to chew on. Eysenck built this whole pyramid on a biological foundation, suggesting that a huge part of who we are is just baked into our DNA. So if our personality really is a biological blueprint, how much can we really change? How much room is there to grow into the person we want to be? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.